The fastest way to lose your future is to believe you still have time. My name is Emma Collins, and the day I became Nathan Reynolds' wife began with a pen that felt heavier than anything I had ever held. The courthouse was almost empty. Pale morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, stretching across polished marble floors, while a clock somewhere behind me marked each passing second with quiet certainty. A lawyer adjusted a stack of documents. Two legal witnesses stood silently near the doorway. Nathan remained beside me, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his calm blue eyes fixed on the papers instead of my face. No flowers decorated the room. No music filled the silence. No family waited to celebrate. There was only a marriage certificate resting on a wooden desk and a decision that seemed to erase everything I thought my life would become. My fingers tightened around the pen until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to ask whether there was still another way, but deep inside I already knew the answer. 48 hours earlier, I still believed my biggest problem was paying next month's rent. I had finished another long shift at the neighborhood bookstore in downtown Manhattan, smiling politely at customers while quietly calculating how many extra hours I needed before the end of the month. Autumn rain covered the sidewalks as I carried a paper coffee cup and a bag filled with discounted groceries toward the apartment where my father and I had lived for nearly 10 years. The building looked exactly as it always had. Old brick walls, flickering hallway lights, the familiar sound of someone practicing the piano 2 floors below. Ordinary things that made ordinary lives feel safe. "Dad," I called as soon as I unlocked the apartment door. No answer came back. The silence felt strange. My father always answered, even if only to complain that I had worked too late again. I placed the groceries on the kitchen counter and walked from room to room. His bedroom stood empty. His reading glasses were gone. The old coffee mug he used every morning sat washed and neatly turned upside down beside the sink. Every drawer had been closed with unusual care, as though someone had wanted the apartment to look untouched. Then I noticed a single envelope resting in the middle of the dining table. My name appeared across the front in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Before I could reach it, headlights swept across the living room window. Curious, I pulled the curtain aside. Four black luxury SUVs rolled quietly to a stop outside the building. The rain reflected across their polished doors while every neighbor who happened to be outside suddenly found somewhere else to be. The rear passenger door opened. A tall man stepped onto the wet pavement without opening an umbrella. His charcoal suit remained perfectly pressed despite the weather. His black hair was neatly styled, and his expression carried the calm confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Even from 4 stories above, his presence seemed to quiet the entire street. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward my apartment window. Our gazes met through the rain. It lasted only a heartbeat, yet something inside me whispered that my life had already changed before we had exchanged a single word. Then 3 slow knocks echoed against my apartment door, each one steady, patient, and impossible to ignore. My hand remained on the doorknob for several long seconds while the 3 quiet knocks echoed through the apartment once again. Every instinct told me to stay silent, yet something deep inside whispered that whoever stood outside already knew I was there. I slowly unlocked the door. The cool scent of rain drifted into the hallway before I saw him. Nathan Reynolds stood beneath the dim apartment light, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his dark hair untouched by the weather, his blue eyes calm enough to make the silence feel heavier than words. 2 men waited several feet behind him, dressed just as professionally, neither threatening nor impatient. "Emma Collins," he said gently. It was not a question. I folded my arms instinctively. "Who are you?" "Nathan Reynolds." His voice carried quiet confidence instead of arrogance. "May I come inside?" Every reasonable thought told me to refuse, but curiosity won before fear could answer. I stepped aside. Nathan entered slowly, studying the apartment with careful attention. His eyes paused on the envelope still resting untouched on the dining table. "You have not opened it yet," he observed. "I was about to." "Then you should." I picked up the envelope with trembling fingers and unfolded the single handwritten page inside. My father's familiar handwriting immediately filled my vision. "Emma, if you are reading this, I have already left because staying would have placed you in greater danger. Please believe one thing before you believe anything else. Nathan Reynolds is not your enemy. Years ago, I made mistakes that affected more lives than my own. Nathan once promised that if those mistakes ever reached you, he would protect you even if you misunderstood his reasons. Trust him before you trust your fears. I read the letter twice before lowering the page. Nothing about it made sense. I looked directly at Nathan. "Where is my father?" He answered without hesitation. "Alive." Relief rushed through me, so suddenly I nearly lost my balance. "Then tell me where he is." Nathan slowly shook his head. "I cannot." "Why?" "Because he believed the less you knew, the safer you would remain." Frustration quickly replaced relief. "You expect me to believe all of this because of one letter?" Nathan reached inside his coat. My heartbeat accelerated until he calmly placed a leather folder onto the dining table. Inside rested several legal documents. The first page immediately caught my attention. Civil marriage petition. I stared at the title before looking back at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "I wish I did not have to ask." "Then do not ask." Nathan remained perfectly composed. "If you become my legal wife, anyone watching you will immediately understand that harming you means challenging me directly. Most people prefer not to make that mistake." I pushed the folder away. Marriage is not protection. Marriage is a lifetime. Nathan nodded slightly. "Under ordinary circumstances, I would agree." He paused before continuing. "These are not ordinary circumstances." Rain continued striking the apartment windows while the old radiator clicked quietly beside us. The ordinary life I had known only an hour earlier already felt impossibly distant. Nathan turned toward the door as though preparing to leave. "I will not force your answer tonight," he said calmly. "Read your father's letter again. Think carefully. Tomorrow morning, if you choose to walk away, I will respect your decision." He rested a simple business card beside the folder before opening the apartment door. Just before stepping into the hallway, he looked back one final time. "Emma, the greatest danger is not that you do not trust me. It is that the people searching for your father already believe you know everything he left behind." Sleep never came that night. I read my father's letter until the paper began to soften beneath my fingertips, searching every sentence for something I had missed the first dozen times. Outside my apartment window, the city slowly surrendered to dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean beneath a pale October sunrise. By 7 o'clock, I had made only one decision. I needed answers, and the only person who seemed willing to give me any was Nathan Reynolds. At exactly 8 o'clock, I found myself standing outside the courthouse listed on the business card he had left behind. A black sedan waited quietly near the entrance. Nathan stood beside it with a lawyer and 2 older witnesses dressed in conservative business attire. No photographers, no guests, no celebration. The entire morning felt strangely ordinary for something that would change my life forever. Nathan looked at me without surprise, as though he had hoped I would come but never assumed that I would. "You came," he said softly. "I came for the truth," I answered. "Not for you." He accepted the distinction with a quiet nod. "That is enough." We walked together into the nearly empty courthouse. The attorney explained each document carefully, never rushing a single page. Every line confirmed that the marriage existed for legal protection while the investigation surrounding my father's records continued. My personal finances remained my own. My career remained my own. My property remained my own. Even the agreement included a clause stating that either of us could request a legal dissolution once the danger had passed. I looked toward Nathan. "You added that?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I never wanted your future to belong to anyone except you." His answer settled heavily inside my chest. The judge arrived a few minutes later with quiet professionalism. The ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. There were no vows beyond the legal requirements, no promises whispered beneath flowers, no applause after the signatures were complete. When the judge congratulated us, the words sounded strangely distant, as though they belonged to another couple entirely. I signed my name with trembling fingers. Nathan signed his with the same steady handwriting I had seen on countless legal documents that morning. The marriage certificate was stamped, filed, and handed to the attorney. Just like that, everything had changed. Outside the courthouse, crisp autumn air greeted us beneath a cloudless sky. I expected Nathan to say something dramatic, but instead he handed me a small envelope. Inside rested a simple silver house key attached to a leather tag engraved with one word: home. "The East Wing guest suite has been prepared for you," he said. Until you decide otherwise, no one will enter without your permission. I stared at the key before looking back at him. You are sending your wife to a guest room? For the first time since we met, the faintest hint of a smile touched his face. I am giving you space to remember that respect should arrive before trust. As the black sedan carried us away from the courthouse toward the estate waiting beyond the city, I looked down at the ring now resting quietly on my finger. It felt unfamiliar, almost unreal. I had entered the morning believing I was sacrificing my freedom. Yet somewhere beneath the uncertainty, a quiet question refused to leave my mind. What if the man everyone feared had just become the safest place my father could have ever chosen for me? The drive to the Reynolds estate took less than an hour, yet it felt as though I had crossed into another life entirely. Manhattan slowly disappeared behind us while quiet tree-lined roads replaced crowded intersections and endless traffic. Nathan sat across from me inside the spacious sedan, reading several folders before closing them and setting them aside without saying a word. He never asked whether I regretted my decision. He never reminded me that we were now legally married. His silence carried an unexpected kind of respect, one that left room for my thoughts instead of trying to shape them. When the car finally passed through towering wrought iron gates, I caught my first glimpse of the estate that now shared my last name. The stone mansion stood surrounded by ancient oak trees, carefully trimmed gardens, and a circular fountain shimmering beneath the afternoon sunlight. It looked impressive without feeling cold, elegant without trying to intimidate anyone. As the car stopped beneath the covered entrance, several staff members stepped forward with warm smiles rather than formal expressions. An older woman with silver hair approached first. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reynolds," she said kindly before extending both hands. "My name is Margaret. I have been looking after this house for many years." The word surprised me. Home. I was not ready to think of it that way. Nathan removed my suitcase from the trunk before handing it to one of the attendants. "Please prepare the East guest suite," he said calmly. Guest suite. Not master bedroom. Not our room. I looked toward him with quiet confusion, but he simply met my eyes and said, "You deserve your own space until trust has time to grow." Margaret led me through the mansion at an unhurried pace. Sunlight poured through tall windows onto polished wooden floors. Shelves filled with books lined the hallways beside framed family photographs capturing birthdays, holidays, and ordinary afternoons. Fresh flowers rested on small tables throughout the house. Soft piano music drifted from somewhere upstairs. Nothing resembled the intimidating world I had imagined. After showing me the guest suite overlooking the rose garden, Margaret smiled warmly. "Dinner is served at 7. If you need anything before then, please ask. Everyone here already knows your comfort comes first." Once she left, I walked to the large window overlooking the gardens below. Nathan stood outside speaking with one of the groundskeepers beside a damaged stone bench. Instead of giving orders, he listened carefully while the older man explained something with animated gestures. Nathan rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, knelt beside the broken bench, and helped examine the damaged stone with genuine interest. A few moments later, both men laughed quietly before shaking hands. The conversation ended not with authority, but with mutual respect. Later that evening, I wandered downstairs searching for the library Margaret had mentioned. Before reaching it, I paused outside a partially open door. Inside, a little girl no older than 7 proudly held up a colorful drawing covered with butterflies and bright flowers. Nathan knelt until they were eye level, studying every crayon line with complete attention. "This blue butterfly is my favorite," he told her sincerely. The little girl beamed before throwing her small arms around his shoulders in a quick hug. He smiled with effortless warmth, pinning her drawing onto a bulletin board already filled with dozens of children's pictures. Standing quietly in the hallway, I realized something I had never expected. The man I had married out of fear looked nothing like the man the world had taught me to fear, and for the first time since my father disappeared, doubt began giving way to curiosity. The following morning, I woke to the sound of birds instead of traffic, and for the first time in weeks my heart was not racing before I even opened my eyes. Soft sunlight poured through the tall windows overlooking the rose garden, covering the room with warm golden light. For a few quiet moments I almost forgot everything that had happened. Then my wedding ring caught the morning sun, and reality gently settled back into place. After getting dressed, I followed the aroma of fresh coffee downstairs. Margaret greeted me with her usual welcoming smile before placing breakfast on the table. Fresh fruit, warm pastries, scrambled eggs, and a steaming cup of coffee waited beside a small bouquet of white roses. Mr. Reynolds had an early meeting, she explained. He asked me to remind you that the library is yours if you would like a quiet place to read. There was no schedule left for me. No rules taped to the refrigerator. No list of expectations waiting beside my plate. It felt strange living inside a house where nobody demanded anything from me. After breakfast, I wandered through the library once again. Morning sunlight filled every corner, while thousands of books rested neatly upon polished wooden shelves. Near the fireplace, I noticed a small cedar chest sitting on a reading table. It had not been there the night before. Resting beside it was a handwritten note in Nathan's careful handwriting. I believe your father intended for you to receive this when you felt ready. No one has opened it. The decision belongs entirely to you. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested several sealed envelopes, a leather notebook, financial documents, and a small silver flash drive. Beneath everything else lay another letter written by my father. Emma, if this box reaches you, then Nathan has already kept his promise. Everything inside explains why I disappeared. I spent the next hour reading page after page. My father had uncovered evidence that several respected financial executives were secretly moving charitable funds into private accounts through a complicated network of shell companies. He had gathered years of records before realizing innocent employees would be blamed unless the truth reached the proper authorities. The notebook contained dates, names, account numbers, and personal observations written with remarkable precision. I closed the final page slowly, overwhelmed by everything he had carried alone. You found it. Nathan's calm voice came from the doorway. I looked up to find him standing quietly with 2 cups of coffee. He walked inside and placed one beside me before taking the chair across the table. You already knew what was inside, I said softly. He shook his head. Only your father knew every detail. He believed the truth belonged to you first. I studied him carefully. You could have opened this yourself. I could have, he admitted. But it was never mine to read without your permission. The quiet honesty in his answer settled deep inside me. Most people with his influence would have demanded immediate access to everything inside the chest. Nathan had waited because he respected a promise made years before. As I looked around the peaceful library filled with sunlight, old books, and my father's final words, I realized something far more valuable than evidence had been hidden inside that wooden box. My father had not only trusted Nathan Reynolds with my safety, he had trusted him with my freedom, believing he would protect both without ever confusing one for the other. That evening the mansion settled into a peaceful silence as soft rain began tapping gently against the tall library windows. I remained seated beside the cedar chest long after the sun disappeared, reading my father's notebook again and again until every handwritten page felt familiar. Each line revealed another sacrifice he had made to protect innocent people he had never even met. Every date, every financial record, every personal note carried the weight of someone who had chosen responsibility over comfort. When I finally closed the notebook, Nathan was still sitting across from me, quietly reading a legal folder without interrupting my thoughts. It was the first time I realized he had been waiting nearly an hour simply because he knew I might need someone nearby without needing conversation. Why did you stay? I asked softly. He looked up from the folder. Because some moments should not be faced alone. I lowered my eyes toward my father's handwriting. You could have convinced me much sooner if you had simply told me everything. Nathan slowly closed the folder before answering. Those were your father's words to give, not mine. His response lingered in the quiet room long after he finished speaking. Most people would have defended themselves. Nathan accepted the misunderstanding because keeping his promise mattered more than protecting his own reputation. The following morning, several attorneys arrived at the estate carrying carefully organized files. They spent hours reviewing the records from my father's cedar chest while I remained beside them, answering questions whenever I could. Nathan attended every meeting but rarely spoke unless someone asked for his opinion. He never attempted to influence the investigation or direct the conversation. Whenever a decision belonged to me, he simply turned toward me and waited patiently. By late afternoon, the attorneys confirmed that my father's evidence would soon be delivered to the proper federal authorities through entirely legal channels. The truth he had spent years protecting would finally reach the people capable of acting upon it. Relief slowly replaced the fear that had followed me since the night I found the empty apartment. After the meetings ended, I wandered into the gardens hoping to clear my thoughts. Autumn leaves drifted across the stone pathways, while the fountain reflected the fading golden light of sunset. Near the rose garden, I found Nathan kneeling beside the same little girl I had seen days earlier. Lily proudly showed him another drawing filled with butterflies, bright flowers, and a smiling family standing beneath a rainbow. Nathan studied every detail with complete attention before carefully pinning the picture onto a wooden display board already covered with dozens of children's drawings. "Do you think butterflies always find their way home?" Lily asked. Nathan smiled gently. "I think they remember where they feel safe." The little girl nodded happily before running toward Margaret, leaving the two of us alone beneath the quiet evening sky. I walked slowly toward him until we stood side by side beside the fountain. "My father trusted you with everything that mattered," I said. Nathan looked at the water instead of me. "He trusted that one day you would learn the truth for yourself." I studied the calm expression that had once seemed impossible to read. Now I recognized something entirely different beneath it. Patience, integrity, quiet strength. The man I believed had stolen my future had spent every single day protecting my right to choose it. And for the first time since our lives crossed, I realized trust had never arrived through grand promises. It had been built quietly, one respectful decision at a time. The weeks that followed no longer felt like a struggle to survive. They became a quiet lesson in learning how trust is built, one ordinary moment at a time. The attorneys continued working through my father's records while the official investigation moved forward exactly as he had hoped. Nathan remained involved only when his experience was requested. Every document requiring my approval was placed in front of me first. Every meeting ended with him asking only one question. "Are you comfortable with this decision?" No one had ever asked me that so consistently before. One bright Saturday morning, I wandered into the gardens carrying a novel I had not been able to finish for months. The air smelled of fresh roses and autumn leaves, and somewhere nearby, I heard Lily laughing. I followed the sound until I found her sitting beneath the old oak tree with colored pencils scattered around a wooden picnic table. She looked up with a smile that could have brightened the entire estate. "Mrs. Reynolds, will you help me draw butterflies?" I laughed softly before taking the empty chair beside her. "I should warn you that my butterflies usually look more like flying potatoes." Lily giggled so loudly that I found myself laughing with her. A few minutes later, Nathan appeared carrying a tray with lemonade, tea, and freshly baked cookies Margaret had prepared that morning. He placed the tray on the table without interrupting our drawing session. "I brought reinforcements," he said quietly. Lily immediately handed him a blue pencil. "You have to help too." Without the slightest hesitation, Nathan sat beside us and carefully began coloring one of the butterfly wings while Lily explained which flowers each butterfly liked best. Watching him listen so patiently to every imaginative detail, I realized this kindness was not something he performed for others to witness. It was simply who he had always been. Later that afternoon, the three of us joined several members of the household in preparing boxes of children's books for a literacy program my father had once supported. Nathan carried heavy cartons alongside the gardeners, accountants, and kitchen staff without expecting anyone else to do the work for him. Margaret teased him about folding the gift ribbons unevenly, and everyone laughed as he accepted the correction with an easy smile. There was no distance between the owner of the estate and the people who worked there. Respect flowed naturally in every direction. As evening settled across the gardens, Nathan and I walked slowly beside the fountain while golden leaves drifted across the stone path. Neither of us hurried to speak. Eventually, I broke the comfortable silence. "People outside these gates think they know who you are." He smiled faintly. "Most people only meet a reputation." I looked toward the water shimmering beneath the setting sun. I almost believed that reputation too. Nathan nodded without resentment. "You had every reason to." I stopped walking and turned toward him. No, I had every reason to ask questions before making conclusions. For the first time since we met, I saw genuine emotion flicker across his usually composed expression. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came, replaced by the quiet calm that had become so familiar. Yet that single moment stayed with me. Somewhere between my father's final promise, Lily's colorful butterflies, Margaret's endless kindness, and Nathan's unwavering respect for every choice I made, I realized my fear had quietly transformed into something stronger. It was no longer difficult to imagine building a future beside the man I had once believed would destroy it. By the time winter arrived, the investigation my father had spent years preparing was finally complete. The attorneys informed us that every document had reached the proper authorities, every financial record had been verified, and every innocent employee whose future had once depended on the truth could finally move forward without fear. For the first time since I found my father's empty apartment, the future no longer felt uncertain. It simply felt quiet. That evening, Nathan asked if I would walk with him through the gardens before dinner. A light blanket of frost rested across the rose bushes, while golden light from the mansion windows reflected gently onto the stone pathways. We walked side by side without speaking, the comfortable silence between us saying more than conversation ever could. When we reached the old fountain, Nathan stopped and reached into the inside pocket of his coat. My heart tightened for reasons I could not explain. He handed me a sealed envelope. "What is this?" I asked softly. "Something I promised myself I would give you when the time was right." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested a completed petition for the legal dissolution of our marriage, already signed by Nathan. Attached to it was another document transferring ownership of the guest suite, and every personal item I had brought into the estate entirely back to me, along with a short handwritten note. "Your freedom was always the promise. Thank you for trusting me long enough to see the truth." I looked up, unable to speak. Nathan stood quietly with his hands in his coat pockets, giving me the same space he had given me since the day we met. "The danger is over," he said gently. "Your father's wish has been fulfilled. You no longer need my name to protect you." I lowered my eyes toward the signed papers. "You already signed everything." "Yes." Without asking what I wanted. He nodded once. "Because this decision should never belong to me." A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the gardens as I folded the documents back into the envelope. Only weeks earlier I would have accepted them without hesitation. Now they felt unexpectedly heavy. "Where will you go?" I finally asked. Nathan smiled faintly. "Nowhere different. The estate will remain open to you for as long as you need it, whether as a guest or simply as someone Margaret and Lily consider family." He never once asked me to stay. That hurt more than I expected. Later that evening, I packed a single suitcase inside the guest suite that had quietly become my home. Margaret hugged me with tears in her eyes before slipping homemade cookies into my travel bag because she insisted long drives should never begin on an empty stomach. Lily ran toward me carrying one final butterfly drawing, this one showing 3 smiling figures standing beneath a bright blue sky. "One for you," she whispered proudly. I hugged her tightly before placing the drawing carefully inside my suitcase. Nathan carried my luggage to the waiting car himself. Before closing the trunk, he placed a polished brass key into my hand. "There is a condominium overlooking the Hudson River," he said. "It is fully prepared if you would rather begin again somewhere familiar but private. No expectations, no obligations. Only a place where you can decide what comes next in complete peace." I closed my fingers around the key while looking into his calm blue eyes. For the first time since our paths crossed, there was nothing left tying us together except the choices we were both finally free to make. 3 weeks passed before I finally unlocked the condominium overlooking the Hudson River. Every window framed a breathtaking view of the skyline, and every room reflected the quiet elegance Nathan had chosen with remarkable care. Fresh flowers stood beside the windows. Shelves already held my favorite novels. Even the coffee in the kitchen was the same blend I always ordered after long shifts at the bookstore. He had remembered details I had never realized I had shared. Yet every evening the apartment felt strangely empty. Safety had returned to my life, but peace seemed to have remained somewhere else. I returned to work, smiled at familiar customers, and slowly rebuilt the routine I had once believed would make me happy again. My coworkers welcomed me back with warm hugs, and life gradually settled into something that looked almost normal. Still, every quiet moment reminded me of the mansion. I missed Margaret asking whether I had eaten breakfast before leaving. I missed Lily running through the gardens with another butterfly drawing clutched proudly in her hands. Most of all, I missed the calm presence of the man who had never once demanded my affection, even when the law had briefly called me his wife. One Saturday afternoon, the television inside the bookstore displayed a local news report. A newly restored children's learning center opened its doors to families across the city. The reporter explained that an anonymous donor had financed the renovation, supplied thousands of books, and created scholarships for children whose families could not afford after-school programs. Before the camera found him, I already knew who the anonymous donor would be. Nathan appeared only for a few moments, thanking the teachers instead of accepting praise before quietly stepping away from the microphones. Watching him disappear from the broadcast exactly as he had disappeared from my life left an unexpected ache inside my chest. That evening I drove without deciding where I intended to go. The familiar roads carried me north until the iron gates of the Reynolds estate appeared before me almost by instinct. The security staff recognized my car immediately and welcomed me with genuine smiles. Margaret opened the front door before I even reached the steps, embracing me so tightly that neither of us needed words. "He is in the rose garden," she whispered softly. I followed the winding stone path until I found Nathan trimming winter roses beside the fountain. He looked up at the sound of my footsteps, and for the first time since the day we met, surprise crossed his usually composed expression. "Emma," he said quietly, "I thought you were beginning your new life." I smiled as I walked toward him. I was. Reaching into my coat pocket, I removed the brass condominium key he had given me. He extended his hand, believing I had come to return it. Instead, I gently placed the key into his palm before closing his fingers around it with both of my hands. "You told me it was only a place to begin again," I said softly. "It still is," he answered. I looked directly into his calm blue eyes, no longer afraid of what I felt. I finally understand something my father knew before I ever did. Home is not the building that protects you. Home is the person who protects your freedom even when it means letting you walk away. Nathan remained silent, but the gratitude in his eyes spoke more clearly than any promise ever could. He did not ask me to stay because he never believed love should be requested. I stayed because, after having every opportunity to leave, I finally realized that the safest decision I had ever made was no longer the marriage certificate I once feared. It was choosing the man who had quietly earned my trust one respectful moment at a time.